The conversation you're about to hear today on the Media Roundtable is the first time we've released the uncut conversations that became the short series, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined. I'm Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and Baritone One and host of the Media Roundtable podcast. We're giving you the full-length version of specific conversations we had with about 30 of the leaders of podcasting today. That includes creators like Ira Glass, Guy Raz, so many others, as well as leading publishers, advertisers, and thought leaders, where we tried to sit around the table and debate what is a podcast, why does it matter, why'd you get into this to begin with, and what do we need to do to preserve that into the future as we build a bigger definition of what podcasting actually is. Some of these conversations are a snapshot of a very specific moment in time, but they're all durable and timeless in the importance of the conversation. I learned a lot. For me, this whole project was a love letter to podcasting and something that is able to blend real business value with the passion that brought me and so many others into this field. And I think you're really going to enjoy it. So with that, please enjoy this next installment of the full-length interview series, What's a Podcast? Welcome to the Media Roundtable. I'm your host, Dan Granger, CEO of Oxford Road and now Baritone One as well. Media Roundtable is always about things that are of utmost importance to what we call the chief audio officer. We come at it through the lens of what's good for brands. But in this business, there's a lot changing. There's a lot changing really fast. And there are things happening now on an industry level that affects everyone. And over time are going to have real ramifications on the advertisers who largely support and fund the business. Podcasting is going through an identity crisis and facing potentially an existential threat as people seek to redefine the medium or do away with its name. And so we're doing a series where we're talking to leading experts in and around the industry to give us perspectives on how we should think about the place that media is in right now and this medium that so many of us have been so passionate about. And many people that listen to this show have truly anchored their business around this idea of podcasting. I think it's time that we define what that means and talk about it openly as an industry and have a little bit of an open lab conversation where we can workshop this thing together and land on a useful definition going forward. So that's what we're doing here today. And I'm very excited because we have a returning guest, somebody who's a very powerful voice across the entire media landscape. And I'm going to remind you a little bit about who he is, but that person is Evan Shapiro. Evan has joined us in the past. He is the owner and cartographer, the only cartographer we know, but boy, is it a valuable body of work that he has created under that handle. His business is eShap, and his Media War and Peace newsletter is a must-read if you're in the media industry. He's also adjunct professor at NYU Stern School of Business and Fordham Gabelli School of Business. He's a former EVP with NBC Universal, and we can thank him for a lot of the joy we got from Portlandia. And interestingly, and very importantly for today's discussion, he is most recently the co-host of a new podcast called The Media Odyssey, where he breaks down media trends with streaming industry veteran Marion Ranchett. So we could keep going on about you, but we only have you for a limited amount of time. And I really want people to hear what you think. I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So look, let's get to the core fundamental question that we're here to talk about, which is, podcasting as an industry and how that fits into the larger landscape. Could you give your perspective on what it was when you first started paying attention to it, and how that's evolved into what it is today?
Sure. What I find fascinating, I mean, you know where the name podcasting comes from, right?
Yeah, the iPod,
which no
right?
longer exists.
Right.
So, to a certain extent, the redefinition of the term is, I think, really crucial. When I first started paying attention to podcasts, it was about 17, 18 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I really got into a show called Comedy Bang Bang,
Mm-hmm.
which is still podcasting to this day. Scott Ackerman and his weird troupe of weirdos. And I became obsessed with the idea that podcasts were actually television shows in audio.
Mm-hmm.
The WTF and Mark Maron was really a talk show in a very classic, sort of way, whether you want to call it radio or television. And Ackerman's show was much more of a kind of weird sketch, Ernie Kovacs type of format. But I couldn't help but close my eyes and see a television show, and so I became very obsessed with turning them into TV shows, and wound up doing that with both of those shows.
Mm-hmm.
Turned Comedy Bang Bang into a television show for IFC, greenlit WTF.
I didn't even appreciate that. You actually were the first wave of taking a podcast and leveraging it into another media
I
platform.
believe we were the first ever to turn a podcast into a television show. I might be
Well,
wrong.
no, but Earwolf was ground zero. I mean, we actually had a guy he joined as mid-roll in 2014. We were going through the whole history, and I knew Jeff Ulrich, and
Yeah.
they were pioneers. So I didn't realize that you had that connective tissue. That's extraordinary.
Yeah, we started it as an interstitial. So we had licensed a bunch of old TV shows, including Larry Sanders and Action with Jay Moore and Freaks and Geeks and a bunch of other stuff. And we needed a connective tissue for the block of programming. And we hired Scott to come in and do interstitial programming in between the shows. And I loved the output so much that we greenlit it as a TV show. I think it ran for 5 or 6 years. And then we greenlit Mark Maron, basically took his podcast and turned it into a sitcom. And then I left IFC and it hit air, and I think it ran for 2 seasons. Really good show, too, by the way.
Yeah.
And, so I always saw podcasting as an art form that started, or it was the first step of intellectual design towards an ultimate goal of many more outlets. And I still see that today. And now podcasts being turned into television shows happens, on a regular basis. And more accurately, now, podcasting is actually consumed most on YouTube more than anywhere else. And the video format. So I think about 2 months ago, YouTube put out a report called "The Year of the Living Room," and they talked about 1 billion hours a day of YouTube watched on TV, just on TV, not total, because it's much bigger than that, but on TV, and 400 million hours a month of podcasting watched on YouTube, on TV, just on TV. And so I do think people are kind of lost in the sauce when they think of podcasting as a single platform art form, because I do think it has the potential to be substantially larger than that. Not to say that audio art isn't fun. I made a podcast called National Lampoon Radio Hour, the podcast, with Cola Scola.
That was you too?
Yeah, Joe Firestone.
Oh.
And a whole bunch of other people, and Alex English, like a bunch of people, Meg Stalter, everybody who's gone on to be massive stars. I mean, a lot of them were already big names back then, but Cola Scola is now on Broadway, and Meg Stalter is now a regular big star, and there were just a bunch of people that graduated to become massive brands out of that. And to me, that was going back to the original National Lampoon Radio Hour, which then people don't realize was literally stitch for stitch turned into Saturday Night Live. NBC offered National Lampoon the money to turn Radio Hour into a television show, and they turned it down. One of many terrible decisions made by National Lampoon over the years. But then they hired Lorne Michaels, who then just went and hired the entire cast of Radio Hour, which included Gilda Radner and John Belushi and Bill Murray and a bunch of other crazy people from Canada. I think there is this misperception that art can only live on one canvas and can't expand beyond that. And I think the podcast is the perfect example of that.
But should it not be defined by the term that we used before? Do you believe that term has outlived its value?
Yes, I do.
You do. And your new show, Media Odyssey. How do you define what that is when is that a podcast?
I mean, I call it a podcast. It hasn't technically speaking, it hasn't outlived it because it's a useful terminology for people to understand how to get it, where to get it, what it is, how to fit it into their lives. Basically, what part of the day am I going to consume this piece of art? And a podcast sits in a very particular piece of someone's day, and it's different for every person. Some people, it's during their jog. Sometimes it's during my morning shit. Sometimes it's on my drive to work.
Right.
Or sometimes it's to put me to sleep at night when I go to bed. So, but calling it a podcast basically tells the consumer where to put it in their lives. On the other hand, it's a very non-traditionally distributed and articulated and monetized podcast or show. So, yes, it is on Spotify. Yes, it is on Apple Podcasts. Yes, it is on YouTube. But the primary distribution mechanism for us is our newsletters. So Marion and I both put out the podcast to our not insubstantial install base on Substack. And that is very much where most of the audience originally discovers it. And then I also put text around it and graphs and charts and things like that. And it's meant to be a piece of thought leadership, more than anything else. And that's how it's being monetized. We are not doing live read ads. We are bringing on sponsors and doing interviews with executives from those sponsors who want to get their message out there, but don't want to do it in a boring way. They want to do it they want to connect themselves to me and Marianne because we have a very specific way of talking about the industry that people seem to pay attention to in a different way than other people. So yes, it is technically a podcast, but it very much defies traditional podcast mores for how it reaches the audience.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I would say this show has a very similar model. We're not trying
Right.
to even play the game of getting on charts. We're not for 99.9% of the
Right.
population. But if you're in this industry, this is important. And our newsletter is also probably the greatest discovery tool. It sounds like the consumption isn't happening once they find out about it. Then they're starting to go other places to consume. But you're saying to
Right.
introduce the newsletter as the primary. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And by the way, I do believe a lot of what you're saying. I would validate that. So many people got into this business thinking that they were going to be Joe Rogan, and what they didn't
Right.
realize is that, like, no, you're doing an email newsletter just through the spoken word primarily, and then there you got a few entertainers that are actually going to make a living at this. But no, I think that's a wonderful definition, and I love what you say about the canvas. This is the first expression, but it can go everywhere, and I believe that to be true as well. I guess where one of the things that I think we're struggling with, and a lot of the people we've been talking to about this, is what do you do with the audio first nature of it? Is that not something that is a distinctive mark of a movement in media that is still important? And that doesn't mean you can't have a video as a companion, but the idea that you don't need it, and that you can use theater of the mind, and you can be doing something else when you consume it, that constraint on the medium actually opens up new channels and a different type of canvas that allows us, what I say is that podcasting is the greatest canvas in media for the free and open exchange of ideas, because I believe that the long form nature of it, and not being limited to something that's just clips, right, and sound bites, that there's something that happens in that type of environment that's different than the others, and should be protected.
But I don't know I don't know how much of that is connected to it being audio first. If I don't know, you put this up on YouTube?
We do.
Yeah, and so if somebody watches this, are they going to have any less of an experience or have any
No,
less of a free
no.
exchange of ideas because they watched it versus they listened to it?
Well,
I think the audio first nature
yeah.
of it is fun. Like as an artist, being able to use the inside of the listener's mind as a set and costumes and special effects is very powerful.
Right.
And if you listen to or watch National Lampoon Radio Hour, I think that's a really good case study for that, because even when you watch it, they don't have costumes and props. They're just
Right.
standing in front of a microphone. But I also don't think that that's any less. In fact, I would argue it's a complementary experience. To me, I listen to George Carlin and Richard Pryor, their albums in the 70s and early 80s. And I just fell in love with these things. I then also watched the specials because
Yeah.
they were different experiences. And, seeing Pryor's face or Carlin's, grimace when he tells a joke or does 7 dirty words you can't say on television or whatever it is, those were expansive for me. And there weren't costumes, there weren't props. It was still kind of the same content, but it still contextualized it. So I think, for an artist who wants to go audio first, definitely don't not do that. But I think an artist these days, making money for an artist is so hard. And it's always been hard, by the way. It's never been easy. It's always been the top 1% that make money. That's not a new phenomenon. There's just the base has broadened to such a level that top 1% is actually more numerous than it's been in previous eras. But it's still complicated. Now it's discovery because there's 5 million podcasts, and being discovered inside of that is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly difficult. So whatever you can do to find your audience and give your audience a chance to find you, do that thing.
Have you ever heard of any of these companies? Shopify, Bayer, Oracle, Indeed, Masterclass, Babbel, Tommy John, LegalZoom, Constant Contact. We could go on, and we could go on so much further now that we're joining forces with our friends at Veritone One. We have created the world's largest specialist agency in audio and in podcasting. Nobody's ever done anything like this before, and it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved. What we do at this agency is we offer comprehensive services for brands that are looking to break out and be successful in this space. We call you the chief audio officer because we believe that what you need requires real specialist work. And the way that we approach it includes proprietary methods in media planning and buying, analytics and attribution, insights. We have a proprietary process called Audiolytics, which is our trademark method for creative development that allows us to score ads for their persuasiveness. Audio isn't just the work that we do, it truly is our passion, and we aim to elevate this industry to new heights. And that's why we're the leaders in brand safety and suitability, as well as in volume in the space. We try to provide solutions that ensure that your ad buys align your values that you have as a brand with your business metrics that you need to be successful. This stuff is hard, but we're here to make it a little bit easier for you. And if you're a chief audio officer seeking best in market performance at maximum viable scale, please get in touch with us. Do the right thing. Go to oxfordroad.com. And if you're passionate about audio, if you're strategic, if you're relentless, and you're looking for a career change, consider joining our mission as an agent of influence. Send us your resume through our website, oxfordroad.com. We made it really easy to spell. Sign up for our free newsletter, The Influencer, and be sure to mention that you heard about us right here on the Media Roundtable podcast, because attribution is important. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, well, and I think that all tracks. I think it's the inverse that is creating some of the challenge, which is like, listen, totally agree with you. Like the common definitions that I think we're leaning toward and that we're hearing from a lot of the people in the industry is that, like, look, the video component can be additive for sure, but if we're going to call it a podcast, it needs to be something you can close your eyes and it doesn't lose its meaning. But if it's video first and the video is required, then I feel like you're now in a different medium. You're now okay. So that's where definition becomes important, right? And so I think, and even in terms of things like, there are hundreds of companies potentially. There's at least dozens that have pod in the name of the business. Like, we have branded this thing. You talk about SNL. Right before their 50th anniversary, they had 2 sketches about it in one episode. So, like, the cultural zeitgeist of it, the movement, and the kind of pirate radio spirit. And one of the things that's really, I think, important to consider here is, as we think about it as an industry, is that, this was was a meritocracy for a long time where it was a level playing field. You could create something and put it out to everybody alongside everyone else. Now we're seeing a lot of ownership consolidation and the rules are starting to shift, right? But if suddenly production value becomes a limiting factor for new voices to compete, I also think that puts potentially a negative strain on the industry.
I agree.
So,
Yeah.
so we're trying to figure out like,
But if you look at, I mean, let's take Joe Rogan aside and a
yeah,
couple of these others aside.
yeah,
You look at the most successful from a pure listenership standpoint podcasts of all time. A good deal of them have very, very, very high production values. Serial being kind of the case study for this. This American Life being the other case study for this. And I can go down the line. These documentary series, these are very high production value. And what they'll say to me when I write about why the fuck aren't you on YouTube, they're like, well, what
yeah,
would we put up on YouTube? I'm like, there's a very easy way to put Serial up on YouTube. There's a very easy way to put documentary podcasts up on YouTube. You just have to take the care to do that. And to me, it's just a matter of reach and audio first is a certain, our podcast is, relatively speaking, audio first. But what I found out is when I added slides to the video the other day with the interview we did with Channel 4, Matt Risley, it was the most watched podcast we ever did.
go figure. Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, and you did
and
something
by the
for the
way,
other
it was a
platform.
PowerPoint slide. It wasn't like I did some
Yeah.
fancy graphic thing,
No, but you gave people a reason why they needed to watch, and I think that that's a strategy that you can deploy to have more value on a video channel. And I agree with you on This American Life and Serial, but the counterpoint has been made on here that Serial, if they had to go video from the beginning, we wouldn't have had Serial.
or Comedy Bang Bang, or a lot of these places. You're absolutely
Exactly.
right.
Yeah. So we want to preserve that. We just need to know how to, how do we define it, right? So if you had to come up with a definition for what you believe podcasting is today, what would you say?
You sent one over email beforehand. I think the only thing I would do is leave the word audio out of it, which is an on-demand storytelling experience in a modular fashion that the consumer chooses when to consume. And I would add, in a second thought, which is an art form in which the artist and the audience have a personal relationship, or at least that's the perception of the audience. They feel, whether it's through watching or listening, there's an emotional personal connection to Sarah from Serial, or Joe from Joe Rogan, or Alex from Call Her Daddy, or Dax, or whomever, or the host on The Daily, or whoever it is, right? They definitely, it's their friend. And I think a portion of that is every other art form. You can multitask. You can be on your phone and answer your email while you're watching Real Housewives, or a football game, or most TV dramas. Maybe not Severance, but others.
Yeah.
I've tried. You cannot do other things when you're listening to a podcast, because what winds up happening is you're like, I just missed this whole section. I have to go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
The mind
Not
is
not with critical thinking. You can't.
No.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to listen to a podcast, or watch a podcast, or consume a podcast and do something else other than maybe fold laundry, jog, or something that just is mindless. But if you have to do something, if you're reading a book or reading an email or writing an email, or it's really hard to do that and listen to a podcast at the same time.
Yeah. So if you think about all the content that's on YouTube, what is not a podcast? Because I think there's a lot of opportunities for confusion, and like just also for context, Spotify just killed the term Spotify for podcasters and changed it to Spotify for creators, right?
Yeah.
And then you have YouTube talking about podcasting as part of their strategy. You have Netflix now looking about, right? So like what? It just
it is. It's getting convoluted. So I mean, obviously the terminology is not dead and isn't going anywhere, as much as I think it's somewhat outdated, and frankly, I think gives Apple too much credit. I think that's my biggest issue with the word.
I see.
Podcast. It's like not there. They're not even a top 2 platform for podcasts anymore. It's really YouTube, then Spotify. So yeah, I mean, to me, video that's on YouTube that isn't, I mean, Mr. Beast is not a podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think makeup tutorials and what would be considered vlogs are podcasts. That's a single person talking to a camera for something other than the long form storytelling that podcasting is most notably for. Yeah, so I think that's the closest I can come, but the lines are blurring. There's no question about that.
Yeah, the lines are blurring, and I think it's what I don't want to see is that big corporations wash away the spirit of what it represents and just starts chasing clips that make people click on them because they're
Yeah,
sound
I think
bites.
the upside of that, or the positive nature is that it doesn't seem like anybody's telling the Smartless guys or Alex or Dax or Joe what to do with their podcast. Like no one's saying, "Hey Joe, you got to shorten it to a tight 40 minutes." His interview with Trump was, I think, 3.5 hours long. And by the way, over 60 million people have watched it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and that's
watch it.
significant.
That's just watching it. That doesn't include the people who listen to it. So
Except consider this, the clips that came out of that made people go to the source and watch it is something that wouldn't have happened on the other platforms, right?
sure.
So I think the other side of the equation is that it allows for promotion in a new way. And I guess I'm not going to name names, but one of the things I am seeing is we're seeing some podcasts shoot up the charts because they're starting to do more clickbaity clips
Yeah.
and tagging those. And so, some of it's inevitable and people are going to chase audience. But I was here at the beginning when you were doing that work with Earwolf, and we remember that this is still rock and roll. Like there is something pirate radio about this that I don't want to die, and I think has a commercial value to brands that many of them will never know it ever existed.
Well, and the thing I would say to you is podcasting, most people don't put podcasting in the creator economy. They don't think of it as creator economy because it predated the creator economy, but in reality, it was the first form of the creator economy to a certain extent. And so I think the rock and roll nature of the creator economy is more powerful than mainstream Hollywood now. And I think this fall, when Joe Rogan decided the election and Jake Paul broke Netflix by slapping an old man around a boxing ring, that was the moment where creator economy basically took control. So I don't think there's a real danger, and brands are embracing it. I mean, brands are spending more money. They're hiring, Kai Cenat and other, creators to come into their ad campaigns. And now what's happening is you're seeing the ads made by creators are actually outperforming the ads made by agencies. And that's not me talking. That's Allbirds talking.
Oh, this is our whole business. We know the difference between a produced ad and an endorsement, and it can be many multiple. I had a brand on yesterday who said they believe the difference is 5 to 10x per impression in response. So totally aligned with you there. I know you got to go. Last, just to summarize, what advice would you give the industry to better protect and preserve what's important about the medium as they try to compete in a highly fragmented ecosystem?
The creator is first. Put the creator first. It's risky from a traditional media perspective, but it's actually far riskier to continue doing the same safe walled garden Hollywood bullshit, because that is, as you just pointed out, the returns on those investments are shrinking on a yearly basis. And so what is embodied in podcasting traditionally is the creator is supreme. And the more a brand can trust in the voice of a creator and kind of like just lean back and let it happen, the more successful they're going to ultimately be.
I love it. Well, right under the buzzer here. So thank you for spending this time with us. And
My pleasure.
You've got an important voice and a wonderful breath of fresh air to have on this subject. So thanks for spending the time.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
That was another conversation from our full series, What's a Podcast? And whether you're a podcaster, an advertiser, or somebody who just cares about this space, I hope this stretched you. It's certainly stretched me and is giving us a lot to think about in how we want to live going forward and protect and preserve the essence of the medium while preparing for the changes we need to make to evolve on the road ahead. If you want to hear the full limited 3-part docuseries, What's a Podcast? The Revolution Redefined, check it out wherever you listen to your shows. But if you want to go beyond that and you want to be a part of the movement that we've got here, it's not just about our defining it. It's about It's about figuring out a path forward. Go to our link in the show description and download our free white paper, What is a Podcast? That has research from over 4,000 Americans on what consumers believe that the industry is. And make sure you sign our petition, also available in the link in the show description, to keep podcasting open. You know, this show is not just about content, learning, or entertainment. This is about having a real effect in the real world on issues that are important to all of us. We hope you'll continue to be a part of it and bring this into real life. Go to oxfordroad.com for more resources or click the links in the show description. Thanks for your time.
In the time it takes you to actually board a flight from Group 8...
Now boarding Premier Altitude Elite Club members.
You could have bought a Hyundai on Amazon. Visit HyundaiUSA.com or call 562-314-4603 for more details. Limited availability, pickup through participating Hyundai dealer in select markets.